The wages of sin is death. Sin is pleasurable for a season, but we know the end of it. The end of it is death. So if I am living in sin, I need a brother to come alongside of me because I need him to say to me, this will destroy you, Mark. And if you get me back on the right path, then you have saved my life. Today I want to talk about the last two verses in James chapter 5, and I'd like to read those verses to you, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. So I was really thinking a lot this week about how to present this to you. So I decided to title this message this morning, If I Were to Stray from the Faith. I'm going to make this kind of a personal thing. I consider myself part of this family. I consider myself a part of obviously the broad family of God. But just as we're all humans, we're all a part of a family. Like I'm a part of the Doss family. I have two brothers, my mother and father. I have two brothers, John and Stephen. Both of them are pastors. One's a pastor in Kansas City. The other is a pastor in Kentucky. And so that is my kind of immediate family. But I also believe that I have a spiritual family, and I'm a part of that. Topeka Baptist Church is my church family. It's my spiritual family. And so God's put me in this body, and the reason why that God puts us in this body together is so that we can do things together, we can share communion together, we can share life together, we can help each other through our ups and downs in life. And God has been very good to this family. We have grown a lot in the last 20 years. We've had a lot of kids, I guess, so to speak, and God's been really kind to us. But if you've been around here long enough, you have seen a lot of people come and go. And you've seen a lot of people that were here for a short time and left, and then there's a lot of people that are here for a long time and left. Something has happened inside the family that has caused them to want to leave. This is how I believe biblically we should approach everybody who leaves the family. So there's a lot of different reasons why people leave the family and stray from the faith, and I'm going to talk more about those in detail, but I wanted to make this personal, so I want to say, if you leave, this is what we're going to do, okay? I wanted to say, if I leave, if I was to stray from the faith, this is what I want you to do to me, okay? I want to make it very personal in that regard, so this is what I expect of you if I stray from the faith, okay? Now, let me just say right off the bat that I don't plan on straying from the faith. This is not some kind of a thing where I'm not being prophetic here or saying, but it is important for us to understand that we're often surprised at the people who stray from the faith. And I'm sure that you've known some people that were strong Christians that have nothing to do with Christ anymore, that have nothing to do with His church anymore. Well, this is what James is addressing here. So this whole book has been about what a mature Christian looks like, right? This is how they talk, this is how they act. And then he closes the book by, okay, if you notice that somebody is not acting in a mature way, this is how you should treat them, or this is what you should do. So he says, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. So let me kind of break the verse down and say, okay, if I was to stray from the faith, if I was to say that I don't have anything to do with Christ and His church anymore, this is what I would want your response to me to be, and this is how we should treat each other. One is, let me just say this, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised, okay? Notice the text. Brethren, if what? Anyone among you. Could you imagine being a follower of Jesus Christ? I mean, being a disciple. I hope you can imagine being a follower of Jesus Christ, because that's what I think most of you are. Imagine if you were a disciple. Imagine if you were, there's a special group called the apostles. The apostles were guys that actually were taught directly from Jesus. So if you hear the term apostles in the Bible, those are people that were taught directly by Jesus Christ. So you have His 12 disciples. Obviously, one of them was a traitor, Judas, who ended up committing suicide. But you have Peter, and you have John, and you have you have a good group you have 11 group of guys that are called the apostles. Paul is actually included in that group because I think Paul was taught directly by Jesus for 3 years in the desert. So he calls himself an apostle. But so here you have these guys who were actually, they were with Jesus for 3.5 years. And man, they saw some incredible things, didn't they? I mean, they saw Jesus raise the dead. They saw Jesus turn 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes into a meal for 5,000 plus. They saw Jesus walk on water. They saw Jesus do some unbelievable stuff that if any of you and I would have saw it, we surely would have said, I'm with him. Right? I mean, I'm with him. Okay? And yet, when the night that Jesus died, they all abandoned him. Peter sat by a fire and said, I don't blankety blank know the guy. I mean, so here's guys who literally interacted with Jesus for 3.5 years, who saw his miracles, who heard his teaching, who had a close relationship with Jesus. And then the night that he died, they all abandoned him. They all turned their back on him. They all ran from him. So what that does is that's a huge warning flag to me. Because if there were people who actually interacted with Jesus, who abandoned him in his moment of crisis, how much more me who has never seen him but yet believes in him? And that's why he says here, if anyone among you wanders from the truth. So that could be anybody. Anybody includes me. Anybody includes you. And I would say this in particular, anyone, that includes the leadership of a church. That includes the pastors and elders. In fact, I have a strong belief that if there's anybody the devil comes after, he comes after people who are in leadership. Because if I can abandon the faith, that affects my congregation. That affects the people who are in my church. And so they're like, man, if Mark's questioning the faith, then how much more should I question the faith? Or if Steve questions the faith, or if Jeff questions the faith, or if Joe questions the faith, or if he turns his back, maybe it wasn't real to begin with. And that's why I think you ought to pray for those of us in leadership, because we are under spiritual attack daily on a daily basis, because there is nothing more than Satan would love to see than to us abandon the faith. So if anyone among you, you have to remember this, that men at their best are just men. 1 Corinthians 10:12 says this, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. One of the sobering things that I wake up every morning and I think about, this is how usually I start every morning. I start every morning with, thank you, Lord, for another day. I'm grateful for another day. Lord, may I ever think about the fact that I am one bad decision away today from ruining my life. So I need your help to make good decisions today. Because I am. I'm one bad decision away from throwing everything away. So if I was to arrogantly stand up here and say, I'll never fall, I'll never turn my back on the faith, and I've heard preachers do this, they just kind of arrogantly speak it this way, man, they're just setting themselves up for failure. So I want to challenge you this morning, if I was to stray from the faith, or anybody was to stray from the faith in this church, it should not surprise us, because we are all just at our core human. We're not supernatural, we're human. And we have that sin nature that's inside of all of us that we're constantly warring against. I think you should respect your leaders. I think you ought to have heroes of the faith. I think that you ought to look up to people in the faith, but don't ever idolize them. Because if you idolize men will always disappoint you. Idolize Jesus and respect men, and then when men fall, you're not going to be disappointed, or they don't respond in a way that you think is appropriate, or you think is good, or you're disappointed in them, then you won't be crushed. See, I made this mistake. I grew up kind of worshiping preachers, worshiping men that could communicate the Bible well. In fact, so I'll tell you this, my brother and I went to hear one of the guys that I respected a great deal. And we were going to school in Indiana, and he was speaking up in Michigan, and my brother and I got in a car, and we drove up to Michigan, about 4 or 5 hours away. And now you got to remember, this is pre-cell phone day, okay? So this is, did anybody in the room have a Polaroid camera? Okay, you know what that, and it takes you guys know what I'm talking about. So my brother and I drove up to Michigan. It was the middle of the winter. It was very cold outside. And we were excited to hear him preach, and then we wanted to get our picture taken with him. So we brought our Polaroid camera. The problem is we left our Polaroid camera in the car. So the service went about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and we went back out and John's like, where's the camera? I'm like, it's out in the car. So there was a huge line. He's a very popular speaker. There was a huge line, and people wanted to get their picture taken with him and wanted his autograph. It just sounds really goofy now. But anyway, and I think some people wanted him to pray with them and different things like that. So my brother and I got in the long line. We got up there to him, and we were just these kids that idolized this guy. And we're like, could we take our picture with you? And so we got on each side of him, and they took the picture. And my brother and I walked down. We sat down there where Steve's at, and it wasn't developing because it was too cold. So we got in the line again. Half hour later, worked our way to him, took a picture, and sat down the front row. And that one didn't develop. So we got in line again. This time, we got up to him and he goes, haven't you boys been up here twice? And we said, yeah. And before we could explain the situation, he was like, you're wasting people's time. Don't come back up here again. And I remember you could have stood me up and punched me as hard as possible in the stomach, and it wouldn't have hurt any worse. And I remember we took the picture, and that one didn't take either. And my brother's like, let's go back up there again. I'm like, you're an idiot. We are not going back up there again. But I tell you that to say that what that showed to me is that I put a man way too high up on the value level. And when he responded as a sinner, because, at first I was like mad. Like, forget you. I think you're a terrible preacher, in fact. I mean, that's what I'm thinking in my heart. And what God showed me, maybe there's stuff maybe going on in his life, I don't know. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he'd been up for hours and wanted to go to sleep. And we were wasting his time. And all of that. I mean, I kind of understand all of that now, but at the time, what it revealed in my heart was when he talked to me that way, my response to him said, you value this guy way too much. He's above Jesus. Shouldn't be there. So if anyone among us falls, if any among us betrays the faith or turns our back on the faith, we shouldn't be surprised because we are at our core human. So don't be surprised. Number two, the second one I would challenge you is if I were to stray from the faith, please forgive me. If any among you wanders from the truth. I've been in church work now since I was 23 years old. So, long time. 25 years. Now I've been in some form of ministry. Most people that will have nothing to do with Christianity have had something to do with Christianity. And what happens is they get inside the church, and somebody inside the church hurts them. So now they become antagonistic towards Christianity. Now, not all people, but I think that there is a certain group where, and I've talked to a lot of people here where it's kind of like, look, I was out of church for 10 years because I went to this church and the pastor found out he was stealing money or he was having an affair. And if that's what Christianity is, I don't want nothing to do with it. All of us in this room are going to have people hurt us, right? When people hurt us, whether inside the church or outside the church, we have a biblical command by Jesus Christ to do what? Forgive them. If somebody wrongs you, Jesus said, you are to forgive them. But the reality is that a lot of times we are living still based on what someone did to us. We are living in the present based on what someone did to us in the past because we refuse to forgive them. So my challenge for you is, if you have somebody that you've looked up to and admired, you have somebody that's that you went to church with and you shared bread with, and now they have abandoned the faith and they have wandered from the truth and they're living this a lifestyle that's unacceptable to God, you have a biblical responsibility to forgive that brother or sister. So it may be a pastor, it may be a Sunday school teacher you had, it may be a leader in the church who you are disappointed in. Do not let that ruin your Christianity moving forward. Rather, forgive them. You may have to leave the church that you're at. There may be things that are going on that are inappropriate and you need to leave. I'm not saying that you should just kind of stick it out, so to speak, but I think at your core you must forgive. So if I stray from the faith, 1, don't be surprised. 2, I beg you to forgive me. Forgiveness must be offered even for people who don't deserve it. Didn't Jesus model that for us? They nailed him to a cross. They hung him from this cross. They put a crown of thorns on his head. They beat him till his body wasn't recognizable. They mocked him. They sold his garment. They gambled over his garments at the foot of the cross. And what was one of the 7 statements Jesus made from the cross? Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. If Jesus forgave those who did such horrible atrocities to him, should we not forgive one another? So if you have somebody that you've looked up to and they are now have abandoned the faith or turned their back on the faith or living an inappropriate lifestyle, if they never come and ask you for forgiveness, you're supposed to forgive them anyway. Forgive them. Number 3, if I were to stray from the faith, don't give up on me. Don't give up on me. What does he say? If any among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back. Now, the implication here is that if somebody leaves the fellowship, if somebody turns their back on the faith, they've wandered, they've gotten off the path, somebody has to go find them. Right? You got to go find them because they're not on the path anymore. It's just like you've gone on a trip before and you've got, okay, we've got 17 in the trip. Oh, there's 16 now. Somebody's wandered from the group. So somebody in the group has to go find the one that's wandered. But what we tend to do, especially in Christian circles, is kind of out of sight, out of mind. I thank God they're gone anyway. That's not what he's talking about here. He says if somebody wanders from the truth. So if I was to wander from the truth, one day you hear Pastor Mark's lost his mind, he's hitting up the bars, he's having affairs, he's not living a life that's pleasing to Christ. I'm sure that you'd get a new pastor here and it'd probably be an upgrade, okay? But my challenge would be, don't be like, thank God he's gone. Don't give up on me. Somebody needs to go to me and say, Pastor Mark, I love you, but I want to tell you the truth. You've lost your mind. Right? And I think sometimes we just tend to give up on people. What's one of the most powerful stories Jesus ever told? The shepherd who had 100 sheep, one wandered from the fold. What did that shepherd do? He went after the one that was lost. So if I was ever to wander from the faith, or anybody you know was ever to wander from the faith, don't give up on them. Now this is where it gets hard. This is why we kind of don't like number 3 because of number 4, which is, if I was to wander from the faith, confront me. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways. Okay, who in the room likes to be called a sinner? Anybody? Anybody? I don't. But we all have blind spots, don't we? Every man does what is right in his own eyes. So we think that this is the way to go. So what we need is if I'm blinded by sin, isn't that how Jesus described the world? That Satan blinds us to sin, blinds us to the reality of the fact that what we're doing is wrong. We think we're doing the right thing. We think we're doing the good thing. And so we're blinded in rage or hate. And so we live a certain way. And so somebody has to come alongside and say, look, man, I love you, but this isn't right. This isn't right. Jesus talked about it in Matthew 18:50. Moreover, if a brother sins against you, go and tell his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. If he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him to be to you as a heathen and a tax collector. So the point being, if I was to wander from the truth, hopefully somebody would come alongside of me and say, Pastor Mark, what are you? Well, you wouldn't be calling me Pastor Mark at the time. You'd be calling me Mark. Mark, what are you doing? Don't you see that this is wrong? Don't you see you're making a mistake? And then if I won't hear you, then you go get some of my other friends, and you guys come together, and you say, hey, Mark, don't you see that this is a mistake? You're making a mistake. And if I won't hear them, then he says, go get the leaders of the church and have the leaders of the church come and say, look, Mark, you're wrong. This is inappropriate. So you've made 3 efforts to reconcile me, and if I won't hear that, then you have to move on from me. I have to be to you as a heathen and a tax collector, as somebody that you would avoid, because he doesn't have a teachable spirit. He's not listening. He's blinded by his sin. And maybe then the isolation from you will cause me to see the error of my ways. The Bible is full of stories of confrontations. One of the most famous ones is David. Remember, he committed adultery with who? Bathsheba, right? And he not only committed adultery with Bathsheba, but then he used his power to have Bathsheba's husband Uriah killed. And then he then got married to her, and then they had a kid, and he thought he covered it all up. So he violated a whole bunch of the commandments, right? Murder, adultery, lying. He violated a whole bunch of them. So for 1 year, he thought he got away with it. Until there's this one prophet in Israel called Nathan. And Nathan, God came to Nathan and said, this is what David has done. You need to go confront him. So Nathan didn't walk in the room and go, hey, you adulterer. He gave a scenario. He said, okay, let's say that there's this guy and he has a whole bunch of sheep, and there's another guy, he just has one lamb. And what would you think of the guy who had all of these lambs and all of these sheep, who went over and just took the guy that had the one? What would you think of that guy? And remember the outrage? David's like, that guy would. And then Nathan looks at him and says, you're the guy I'm talking about. How much courage did that take? Because we're not talking about just some pastor. We're not talking about some physical presence of him. We're talking about a king that could have you killed. I mean, he obviously has no boundaries. So Nathan says, you're the man. You're the man. And what did David do? He broke down. His sin had been exposed. God used that confrontation to open his heart to the fact that, man, I am living wrong. Let me just give you some things if you're thinking about confronting somebody, because this is what I don't want. I don't want you to run out of church today and grab everybody you know who's not living right, and let me tell you about... I think we need to use some wisdom. One is some things to consider before confronting. One, get the facts. A lot of stuff's hearsay. Somebody's been gone 3 weeks. They must have left the church. No, maybe they're just on vacation. Because it's going to be really awkward if you go, are you living in sin, brother? No, we were in Colorado. Get the facts first. Two, check your own heart. Sometimes we like to point out the sins of others and we haven't dealt with it ourselves. Remember what Jesus said? Before you go pointing out the speck in somebody else's eye, take the 2x4 out of yours. Isn't it? We are often annoyed by the sins of others that we struggle with. Oh, they have such a pride issue. Okay, that's a pretty, pride. I got a pride problem. Look at my own heart. Check your own heart. I would say this before confronting someone. Pray, 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 pray. Pray about it. Pray often about it. Pray long about it. Make sure love is the aim. Do I love this brother? Do I care about this brother? Do I care about this sister? Make sure that love is the aim. Go directly to the person is another thing. Go directly. Don't send them a Facebook message. Don't send them a text. Don't call them. Go look them in the eye. Go directly to the person. And I would just challenge you, give it deep thought. Think about this is what Nathan did. So God says you need to confront David. I believe he gave it deep thought. He wanted to engage David's mind. Okay, let me paint this scenario for you. So what would you do in this situation? So if you go to somebody and you confront them, it needs to be creative. I think it's inappropriate to just go up to somebody and say, "You adulterer!" It's not going to go well. But I want to tell you this. If I was to stray from the faith, I pray that many of you would have the courage to confront me. Because we all have blind spots and we all get blinded by sin, and we need somebody to pull back the stuff from our eyes. We call it in our house, there's the elephant in the room. And there's a time and a place to point out the elephant. Does nobody see the elephant in the room? Confront me. And let me tell you, it'll hurt initially. When somebody confronts you or you confront somebody, it hurts initially. It's just like, look, there's two kinds of cuts. Like I can take a knife and just stab you, or I can take a knife and I can use it as a surgeon and cut you open. Cutting's cutting. Like you better put me so far under if you're going to cut me, because I don't want to feel that pain. So if I cut like a surgeon or I cut with a knife in trying to inflict harm, they both hurt. So they're going to be hurt. They're going to be upset. That's a part of confrontation. But boy, isn't it good if you cut the person, if the surgeon cuts the person and the cancer comes out? Or the heart surgery is done? The heart is repaired. Then number 5, if I were to stray from the faith, number 5, save me. Let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death. Sin will kill everything good in my life. Sin results in the death. The wages of sin is what, church? It's death, right? The wages of sin is death. Sin is pleasurable for a season, but we know the end of it. The end of it is death. So if I am living in sin, if I have abandoned my family and abandoned my wife and I'm living an adulterous affair, I need a brother to come alongside of me because I need him to say to me, this will destroy you, Mark. And if you get me back on the right path, then you have saved my life. That's what he's implying here. If you go to a brother and you confront him, he sees the error of his ways, he gets back on the right path, you have saved him from a ton of hurt. And you have covered a multitude of sins. Because what happens with sin? Sin leads to another sin, which leads to another sin, which leads to another sin. They just multiply. You just don't sin in isolation, do one thing. It covers a multitude of sins. What did Paul say in Galatians 6:1? Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. That's important there. Spirit of gentleness. I love you, brother. I love you, friend. I love you, Mark. And this is why I'm talking to you. Because I love you. And that's hard to do. If you come with this spirit of, man, I want to see him pay, that's the wrong spirit. If you come with, look, I've been down that road. I see where it leads, and it leads to nowhere good. I'm begging you to get off that road. Some of you in this room have been affected by affairs. So if you have been affected by an affair, then would you not want to see a brother who is going down the same road, go to them and say, look, man, this doesn't end well. I'm telling you this because I have tasted the pain, the bitterness of this. It does not taste good. Do not go down this road. And if you get that brother back on the right road, you have saved his life. And is there nothing more gratifying or satisfying than saving a person's life? I don't think so. Why am I a pastor? Because I want to talk to you about Jesus and because I want to help save people from destruction. See, there's two reasons why people fall away from the church. One is they backslide and they go away from God. Two is they were never in the faith to begin with. So if I go to you and say, look, man, Christians shouldn't live this way, Christians shouldn't act this way, Christians shouldn't talk this way, Christians shouldn't participate in this, and you tell me to jump off a bridge, you probably were never in the faith to begin with. But if I come to you and confront you, and the Holy Spirit uses me to confront you to say, oh man, I do need to change, then there was something inside of you to begin with. Because you can't get something like the Holy Spirit inside of you and just ignore it. I hope this helps all of you. I pray that God gives me 20 more years here, and then at some point you're going to have to turn this sucker over to somebody that's younger. But if God will give me to 68 or 70, I'd like that. I'd like that. But the devil and I are wrestling every day. And he'd love nothing more than to drag me into the pit of sin. And look, I'm actually kind of terrified after preaching this sermon because I know it's coming this week. Every time I preach, God says, okay, let's test that this week. You know what I'm saying? Like every time I preach on patience, it's like I have the worst week ever the week after I'm being patient. It takes forever in the drive-thru and people set through stoplights and it's like, okay, let's try out your sermon. I want to stay faithful to Jesus till I die, and I think many of you do too. But if I stray from it or you stray from it, we shouldn't be surprised by it because we're all human at our core. We all have things going on in our minds that nobody else knows about. We all have situations that we're living in isolation with. We shouldn't be surprised, but I'll just say this. If somebody that you love and respect does stray from the faith, don't be surprised about it, but then please forgive them. Don't let your life be ruined because they ruined their life. Forgive them. And then don't give up on them. Don't say, well, they're not in the family anymore. Don't give up on them. Instead, go and lovingly confront them. And then after confronting them, if they change, then you have saved them. So use a lot of wisdom with this, folks. I just challenge you in that regard. I gave you some steps on if you know somebody that's not in the fellowship anymore, if you know somebody that's wandered from the faith, I would just challenge you in this way. Pray about it a lot. Pray for opportunities to talk to the person. Pray for maybe they would even open doors where you could walk in and talk to them about it. Please don't set people up or, don't call them on, unless, if God speaks to you, like somebody's come to your mind right now sitting in here, that you need to get with them this week and talk to them, then I think you should listen to the Holy Spirit. But I'm just challenging you to be careful with it. Use wisdom with it. So, my goal for this church has always been that I want anybody who's ever left here to feel welcome if they come back. And we've had that happen quite a few times. Somebody left, they got mad, this and that, and then they come back in, they just settle right back in. I want that for here. We're going to have people come and go all the time. If they leave for wrong reasons, we go and rescue them. They should feel just as welcome when they walk back in as they were here before. We're in a spiritual battle, folks. We are in a spiritual war. Let's pray for each other.